All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And to those on Zoom as well. Thank you very much for joining us today for our Tubman talk. The This is the third, I believe, of the term of we've had quite a few, but it is the first time that we're gonna be having a student give a talk this term. And I think this is probably one of the first talk ever by an undergraduate student. I don't think we've had an undergraduate student give a talk at Tubman, which is a big deal. And it's even a bigger deal for me personally because she's my student, currently taking my course right now, which makes it personally a thing of joy to behold. And I must say, and I'm telling you now, I'm still going to talk about the abstract. When I read through the abstract, I was like, wait, a student wrote this? Like, it is impressive, and I cannot wait to see the kind of questions and the kind of conversations that you're going to pose to us today. But for the purpose of those who do not know, our speaker, our speaker Karina Deepnarine is a third year student here at York whose work sits at the intersection of race, identity, and post-colonial thought. She currently serves as our undergraduate research assistant or undergraduate assistant here at the Tubman Institute. She's also an undergrad member of the Area Tubman Institute's executive committee, so part of the decision makers, as it were. Beyond the research, Karina has a distinguished record of leadership and community engagement. From 2021 to 2023, she served as vice president and president of Gets Black Voices. I hope I pronounced that correctly, where she spearheaded initiatives like assemblies, panels, discussions addressing colorism, texturism, microaggression, and Black student empowerment, as well as the organization of Black History Month programming. She has collaborated with Black graduation coaches through the Black Community Advisory Council to help predominantly non-Black schools establish Black student associations. She has been interviewed by the Peel District School Board on strategies to better support Black students and has spoken on several high-profile panels, including the Jane Augusten Black Students Association Conference 2025 with the Peel District School Board at York University on the Black undergraduate experience. Her leadership spans multiple organizations. She's the social media director for the Black Business Student Association, Ontario Hub leader for the Federation of Black Canadians, social justice chair for the United Caribbean Highlands, and an active member of the RISE committee. She also serves as vice president of internal affairs for the Black Women in Law Association, where she advocates for the advancement of Black women in the legal profession. Her advocacy has been recognized through numerous awards, including the NDP Rosemary Brand Social Justice Award, the Jacob Marketing Award for Inclusivity, and a Peel Regional Police Scholarship for Equity and Diversity. A body of work reflects a commitment to dismantling the post-colonial mindset and advancing racial justice, both within academic spaces and the broader community for Black communities. So today, Karina is going to be leading a workshop on learning the post-colonial mindsets, confronting internalized anti-Black racism. I believe that everyone attending this session today have all read the abstract, which is also projected on the screen. So I would not be going through everything, but I would like to single out the facts that I was particularly impressed, and I'm now looking forward to what Karina would tell us based on how the the level of thought and detail that went into categorizing the different levels of internalized anti-Black racism, what she considered to be self-directed, lateral, and interpersonal. I thought at the different layers that she has highlighted, these are really, really critical points that probably deserve workshops of their own. So I'm really, really looking forward to what she will be discussing today. So without further ado, I'm going to yield the floor to her. And yeah, take it away.
Like, want to make sure I'm set up. Can you all hear me? Yes. We're good. We're good. Okay, perfect. All right. Yes. Okay. I think I might actually hold this. Um, But first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Professor Damilula, for that lovely introduction. I really valued the privilege to be here today and also to be a part of such an amazing institute like the Harriet Tubman Institute. I just want to give a great gratitude to those of you sitting in front of me today for supporting me. And also, thank you so much to those online for making your way as well virtually. Um, so, just going a little bit deeper on my topic, um, I do want to say that this is a topic that is deeply personal to me, but also something I feel like with the state of the way the society is right now, we do need to address. So I want to say thank you once again, and for coming. And today we're going to be talking about something that is globally significant, which is the internalized anti-Black racism. So, with this workshop, it's grounded in the idea that colonialism never truly ended. While political independence has been achieved in many places, the psychological legacies of colonialism remain alive with how we view ourselves, how we treat each other, and in how Blackness is understood across societies. So, our central guiding question today is this. Thank you. Um, how does internalized anti-Black racism operate across the African diaspora, and how can we resist and reconstruct healthier identities and communities? Sorry, how do I? Just gonna double check. This way? This one? Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Um, so to answer that, we'll take a journey through history, theory, lived experiences, and strategies for resistance. So here's how we'll move together with our time. So I'll be expanding on the essential historical and theoretical roots of internalized racism. And we'll also take a comparative global case study focused on the denial of Blackness in the Caribbean and Latin America. And next, we'll analyze how these patterns are amplified in contemporary social media and pop culture. And then we'll move to generational trauma, examining how these patterns are passed down and impact mental health. And finally, it is a really difficult conversation to have when we're talking about internalized anti-Black racism. And typically, I'd love to talk about positive things in our community, but that's why I want to end with strategies for resistance and reconstruction, practical pathways for unlearning colonial conditioning. See, my goal is for us to walk away not just with an understanding of internalized anti Black racism and how it works, but with a sense of agency and clarity about how to challenge it. So, to understand internalized racism, we must return to colonial history. But before we do jump into that, I do want to specify a couple things with my title. So I do talk about internalized anti-Black racism, but I also do talk about the post-colonial mindset. So the reason why I choose to use these two terms is because while internalized anti-Black racism is something which exists today, I do also want to call out the colonial mind because this is something that was learned. This is not something that we randomly just received and got. So the impact of colonialism on identity, um, we have to take a look at the transatlantic slave trade. So millions of Africans were captured, enslaved, and transported across the Atlantic. But I'm here to talk about how the enslavement wasn't only about physical domination. It required an ideological system, a set of beliefs that justify the brutality. The ideology was racial hierarchy. It declared that Black people were inferior, less human, and destined for servitude. So it started with colonial schools, the churches, and governments. They spread these beliefs. And over time, they seeped into how we saw ourselves. But this is what makes internalized racism different from external racism. It's not external hatred, it's hatred absorbed, reshaped, and directed inward. So on the screen, I have key thinkers. So this was probably, as I said, this is a personal kind of uh, interest of research when we're talking about internalized anti-Black racism. So I was probably 13 when I came across the frameworks here that I'd like to use. So we have Franz Fanon. So in Black Skin, White Masks, Fanon described how colonial subjects internalized inferiority. So he coined the phrase epidermalization of inferiority. So that's the way racist ideas become etched onto the very skin of the oppressed, shaping how they see themselves. So Fanon observed aspiring whiteness, straightening their hair, bleaching their skin, rejecting Creole for French. And these were not mere choices of style, but strategies for survival in a society that punished Blackness. And next, we have decolonizing the mind. So it is explained how colonialism targeted not just the land, but the consciousness. So children in Kenyan schools were punished for speaking their mother's tongues. Success was equated with mastering English. And over time, many internalized the idea that their languages and cultures were backwards. And finally, that brings me to bell hooks. So Hooks highlighted how internalized racism intersects with gender, beauty, and class. She argued that white supremacy works with patriarchy to enforce Eurocentric beauty and those standards of straightening hair, lighter skin, and slenderness. So this particularly affected Black women who features are often judged through overlapping systems and intersectionality of racism and sexism. So you guys are probably thinking, why does this matter? Well, this does matter, and it's an important understanding. So the key takeaway is this: colonialism didn't just dominate Black bodies, it colonized Black minds. And those colonial beliefs persist today, shaping how people of African descent view themselves and each other, even generations later. So, we're going to move to the Dominican Republic. So, why? So, the Dominican Republic is something that I want to use as an example for a real world context. I mean, I spoke about the historical and theoretical frameworks, and I also spoke about some authors that allowed me to understand the term of internalized anti Black racism and the post colonial mindset. But I want to use the Dominican Republic in a way to understand the real world context. So, the Dominican Republic has a long history of anti Haitian sentiment. It's rooted in Spanish colonial identity. So the dictator, Rafael, actively promoted whitening policies. And in extreme cases, this has justified violence, such as the Parsley Massacre of 1937, where thousands of Haitians and Dominicans were murdered in an effort to racially whiten the border region. This denial is why many African Dominicans historically rejected the term Black as a direct performance of internalized colonial desire for proximity to whiteness. So, however, the crisis of the racial denial is not confined to our history textbooks. So, it is alive, and I would also like to say it's viral today. So, I want to analyze how this profound act of self rejection continues to play out in our contemporary culture and digital discourse. Okay. So, what I have on my screen is a phrase used in popular culture. It is often treated as a punchline or a running joke about racial ambiguity. So, like I said, this is a workshop, but I do want to make sure that we're also having conversations because when we're talking about internalized anti Black racism, something I come across when I'm speaking to my community is we don't have the space to converse about these things. So that's what I want to share my time with to encourage this conversation. So, why is laughing at the specific denial instead of questioning so damaging, especially to the reality of Afro Latino identity? So, um, if you guys want to raise your hands to possibly give an idea or possibly give your input, it's an open floor discussion on why something like this might be insensitive. Yep. Thank you so much. So you're right. The humor in the joke functions as a diversion. So when the community laughs, they are endorsing the idea that Black ancestry is embarrassing or negotiable. This laughter shields the core issue that the denial of African heritage is the price of admission into a wider national identity. So the silence is devastating to Afro Latino communities because it validates the internalized racist belief that Blackness is the source of problems, preventing them from addressing the systemic racism that results from the denial. It forces Afro Latinos to choose between their national identity and their racial truth. So the lesson across cases is though the forms differ across the African diaspora, the root is the same. Colonial hierarchies internalized within communities. So now that we've set the foundations, let's look at how internalized anti Black racism actually manifests into daily life. So I divided it into three interconnected levels, and Professor Demilola did say that these are something that we could dive into, and 100%. I mean, when I was doing my research and planning out this Tubman talk, this is something that can go into so many ways because it intersects. I mean, the self-directed nature of it, the different type of levels that I have organized it into, it can be expanded on because of how broad this term is. But first, we'll be starting with the self-directed. So self-directed internalized racism happens when colonial messages of inferiority takes roots inside us. So, shaping how we see our bodies, our beauty, our intelligence, and our worth. And a few instances of this occurrence, which I do have on the screen here, is skin lightening. So, skin lightening or skin bleaching products make up a global industry of over $8 billion. So, this reflects a colonial messaging that Blackness is undesirable. And even when I'm transferring it over, when I'm looking at language and cultural alienation, the ghetto label as a classist weapon, the shame and rejection directed towards Creole, patois, African American vernacular English, so AVE or Ebonics, they're not just about grammar. They strike at the heart of cultural, educational, and political aspiration. This internalized disdain is often used by labeling these rich, complex dialects as ghetto, slang, or improper. So, even taking a deeper look into the word ghetto and the fallacy behind it, the label is not linguistic. It is classist and racist. It is a colonial projection that links specific and often vibrant languages forms. So, for poverty and low intelligence. So, by internalizing this label, the individual accepts the premise that their authentic cultural expression is inherently inferior. And I know I did bring up classism as well. So the connection to that is since colonial structures ensure that Black communities are disproportionately marginalized, their vernacular English or their vernacular in general becomes associated with that marginalization. So the self directed rejection of one's own language becomes a desperate attempt at a class mobility, an effort to sound educated or respectable by adopting the language of a former colonizer. So, this perpetuates the colonial lie that Black culture is unsophisticated, hindering cultural transmission and political mobilization in their native vernacular. So contemporary examples might be a phrases that we see on TikTok. So as we can see, the languages that they use in commercials, it is used in a way that is trendy. However, if I was to use that language amongst my coworkers in a corporate office, I don't know if it's going to come off as the same marketable, approachable dialect. So these are the that is the understanding of what it means in a self-directed internalized racism when we sort of restrain ourselves and view our natural vernacular in a way that is not applicable to everyday life. Okay, so let's take a look at contemporary examples. So I want to bring to attention something that is very popular, which is called the Toronto slang. So I find this paradox very interesting because it popularized phrases such as waste you, man, them, ting. So these are often direct, undiluted borrowings from Jamaican and other Caribbean patois and Creole dialects. So when these authentic Caribbean dialects are labeled ghetto or hood by people within the community and also externally outside the community, it drives self rejection. So, how does the act of calling one's own dialect ghetto reveal an internalized desire for class mobility and respectability? And how does it ultimately reinforce the colonial lie that the language of the Caribbean is inherently inferior? So I guess I kind of answered my own question, and this was supposed to be a discussion, but to kind of just analyze that question on its own, the paradox is a perfect storm of self directed internalized racism. I mean, the desire to avoid the ghetto label, a racist and classist term, is so powerful that it compels individuals to publicly disassociate from their own linguistic heritage. This self rejection is a defense mechanism. It attempts to elevate the speaker by demonstrating a perceived linguistic and class distance from their own people. So I do have a couple screenshots that I did list on my screen. So this is to someone who was being interviewed, and it was based in Toronto, and they were speaking, and these are the comments that were said regarding the dialect. So this process teaches that the history and complexity of their language are worthless, and they are stripped off the Black body and repackaged as a non-racial slang for popular consumption. Yep, thank you. And now we'll be moving on to lateral. So lateral internalized racism is when we direct colonial hierarchies sideways at one another instead of upward at the system that created them. So this is when internalized racism creates hierarchies within the Black community itself. So I do have a couple examples here as well, which kind of shows the comparison of what is ghetto and what is high fashion. And I have two instances of that as well. But I want to jump to a particular occurrence of lateral internalized anti Black racism that I do see particularly affect the way we have relationships. Whether that be Black youth or just in the Black community itself. Just by a raise of hands, who here has seen Pop the Balloon dating videos on Reels? Okay, I see the disappointed faces when we have our hands up. So, this particularly I do want to talk about because I do see a couple instances as to why balloons are being popped, why this might be the case, and what their preferences are. And so, this is what I like to touch on as cultural consumption versus relational rejection. So, this is a hypocritical layer. I mean, it is the dynamic of elevating um, particularly I am sidetracking, but there is this also ideology where we kind of date non-Black individuals who consume or appropriate Black culture while simultaneously rejecting, ignoring, or devaluing Black partners who are the source of that culture as well. um, so this practice demonstrates an internalized belief that Black culture is desirable, but the Black body, when attached to that culture, is not. It is a tragic performance of internalized racism, valuing the cultural aesthetic as filtered through a non Black body while demanding Black individuals to conform to wider standards. So, the reason why I kind of jumped to the Pop the Balloon challenge is I did see a clip the other day that showed how there was a preference of how long their hair should be, how they should wear their hair. Um, and this dials down to kind of that internalized racism where we do have see a lateral impact. So I felt like that was an important example on how we're seeing that in contemporary society. So these patterns don't stop within our communities, they extend into how we navigate the world. So I want to take a look at the most complicated layer, and that's how internalized racism shapes our relationships with others and the boundaries we fail to protect. So, this is what I would call interpersonal, and this is how we police each other. So, internalized racism happens when we reproduce racism through our relationships, in the languages we allow, the jokes we tolerate, and the boundaries we fail to hold. I mean, this occurs when Black people reinforce discriminatory practices against one another. And a specific example, I do have a couple on my screen, and I would like to call it sanctioning slurs and negotiating boundaries. Um, so before I dive into what's being said on the screen, um, I want to take a look at the N word pass and the performed apathy. Um, let's be direct about the so-called N-word pass. I mean, when we tell non-black people that you can say it, I don't care. That's not progress. That's erasure. The word was the very last thing many of our ancestors heard before we were killed. But exhaustion is not liberation, and apathy is not empowerment. It's surrender disguised as peace. So if you say you don't care, ask yourself, what made caring feel like a burden? When did defending your dignity start to feel like too much work? So that's a little bit about that past that I have very strong feelings about. Um, but I wanted to drive it towards something that I do see that is popular amongst TikTok, Reels, Instagram, Twitter, or X. I want to talk about the language and the term YN. So it's a slur disguised as a slang. And when young boys weaponize language against one another, they're reenacting the same colonial distortion of masculinity. So, what does this word mean? It is young N word, and it is used in a way that hyper masculinizes young Black boys. So, we've seen how interpersonal policing in the digital age mirrors colonial hierarchies. And in the screenshots, we do have examples and screenshots from Twitter. Um, YN was used to kind of describe and affiliate young Black boys with hood culture, with aggressiveness. And so we have instances where people are using it against non-black people are using it against Black people. We have instances where there are racist instances, and instead of referring to the young Black boy as a young boy, they refer to him as a YN. So what this tells us is that there is a there's a deep false and there's a deep false idea of how we see interpersonal policing in the digital age mirror colonial hierarchies. So let's take a look at how they can be challenged. So when we're looking at the contemporary dynamics, which is the digital colonialism, and I have touched about it a little bit throughout kind of my talk. I've gave you kind of screenshots and examples and list of media. And the reason why I implement digital media so much into this talk is because it is a tool that is used, and it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way. Um, so it's deepening the colonial wound is what I would like to identify it as. So when we're talking about memes and the trivialization of specifically colorism, the rise of racial memes, particularly those joking about team light skin or team dark skin, serves as a dangerous function. It trivializes colorism by repackaging a serious system of oppression as harmless humor. I mean, this process makes the colonial hierarchy viral and socially palatable. By laughing, the community implicitly sanctions the division. Um, so what we have here is I did divide it into memes, algorithms, and kind of music. And the reason being is because there is there's instances in the media where I can expand into. I mean, I can talk about the casting in movies, the choices of that. I could talk about the intersectionality of it all. But these are like the three that I do want to highlight. Um, so just by a show of hands, who here has seen content online where Black people rank or compare each other based on skin tone? I am impressed to see that there is not many hands, and that means that there's progress. I do also want to address that when we are raising our hands. I do hope that nobody raises their hands because that shows that you guys have great social medias and you're not interacting with anything for. Um, so yeah. So here is some media that is online, which I call digital colonialism and policing. So, the reason why I bring this to our attention is because we need to shift the conversation when talking about internalized racism. It's not only something that is done to us, as it's something we also might participate in. So, the use of memes go beyond colorism, and it includes the self-referential deployment of historical anti-Black characters and stereotypes. Sorry, yeah, you can skip this. Okay, perfect. Okay, so what I have here is some more characters that I like to say on social media. Um, so here we have memes that reduce complex Black identity to simplistic, often grotesque, which is the very definition of a minstrel show. I can call this a phenomenon a digital minstrelsy, often for external consumption and engagement. This process takes the colonial stereotype, which was designed for dehumanization, and repackages it as a source of cultural humor or relatability. This act of self caricature provides external validation from a white gaze and tragically reinforces internalized beliefs that these crude stereotypes are true, funny, or legitimate reflection of Black identity. So on the screen here, I do have a couple of examples that I do feel are very very insensitive to our community. It is often jokes that makes us feel like we are limited to that stereotype that often racist advertisements tried to push onto us historically. So saying I don't care about racial slurs or the mockery of the community, it isn't about confidence, it's learned disconnection. I mean, accountability doesn't mean guilt, it means responsibility. We didn't start this harm, but we are responsible for whether it ends with us. So, digital platforms, actually, you can go back one slide. Yeah. So digital platforms function on engagement data, as I said. So when we were raising the hands and I was talking about who here has seen that sort of media, ultimately it does function on engagement data. And because historical bias prioritizes whiteness and proximity to it, the algorithms perpetuate this sort of colonial standard. So content even in advertisements, movies, when we search up a hair tutorial, a makeup tutorial, content featuring lighter skinned individuals or looser curl patterns naturally receive more engagement due to pre existing preference loop. So, this algorithmic bias creates an echo chamber where Eurocentric beauty standards are boosted, leading to the systemic shadow banning or under promotion of content featuring darker skin tones or type 4 hair, and effectively makes those individuals less visible and within the digital economy. So I also did, sorry, one more time, but back. I did want to additionally talk about music and phenotype valorization. Reason being is, oh, sorry, yeah, backwards. Perfect. Okay. So, in popular music, lyrics valorizing specific light skin phenotypes go beyond simple preferences. So, as I went back to the Pop the Balloon videos when I'm talking about racial dating preferences, we're going back to the very media that we consume. So, it goes beyond the simple preference because this represents the active rejection of darker skin. I mean, these lyrical preference reinforces the scarcity mindset inherited from colonialism, where desirability, worth, and resources are tied to proximity of whiteness. So, by doing so, the music not only normalizes lateral prejudice, but also institutionalizes Eurocentric beauty standards as a cultural mandate within the community. So that's kind of a explains, as you can see, I like them light skinned, lighter than a feather. What does that tell us about preferences? What does that tell us about how we kind of group light skinned and how we kind of associate that skin complexion and its proximity to whiteness as lightness or light like a feather. It's ultimately a it's ultimately something that I would categorize with the proximity to whiteness, all in all. And so this is supposed to kind of display colorism and also the internalized racism when we're talking about digital colonialism. So, um, we talked about how social media both reinforces and resists internalized anti-Black racism. And I want to share a powerful example of that resistance, which recently changed my plan for this very demonstration. So, when I originally planned this talk, I did intend to have someone search on TikTok for hair types to kind of demonstrate that on TikTok, when you type up curly hair, it had a category for type 1, type 2, and type 3, but not type 4, as you can see listed there. However, thanks to the persistent activism of a Black content creator who brought this to attention, TikTok recently updated its search option to include type 4 hair category, and this is crucial. I mean, when you look at options, you can see the type 4 category is present. So, what does this ultimately tell us? So, this small change and the addition of a button to include type 4, it's not just a typical and technical update. It is the direct result of Black creators challenging digital colonialism. It proves that our collective behavior and the community advocacy can force the very platforms that profit from our marginalization to formally recognize our diversity. Resistance in this case meant literally rewriting the algorithm to ensure Black beauty is not just visible, but categorized as equally valid. So ultimately, I did bring up before, but social media is a double edged sword. It spreads both the wounds of colonialism and the seeds of resistance. So I did a little bit of talking here and there about the history. I provided a case study. I also talked about the contemporary dynamics of social media. But how does it pass down? I mean, it passed. I talked about history, and that stemmed in the colonial time period. So, how does this pass down? Um, and that I would like to connect to the intergenerational transfer of pain, which is generational trauma. Um, so, the impacts we've discussed, it doesn't stop with one person. They're passed down through families, a toxic inheritance. That is ultimately generational trauma. So, how does this internalized oppression transfer across generations? So, parenting and policing. Parents who internalize respectability politics or colorism often unknowingly or willingly transmit these standards to their children. And ultimately, it frames Blackness as something that is more of a burden to be managed rather than a beauty and acceptance, something amazing. And additionally, unspoken anxiety and silence. So, trauma is often transmitted not through direct stories, but it can also be transmitted through silence, unspoken fear, and emotional dysregulation. So ultimately, the chain of intergenerational pain directly impacts Black mental health. It shapes our opportunities and confidence. So, how do we resist? Um, this topic, I mean, it's very interesting topic because of us kind of pointing at ourselves and kind of looking at what's probably going on with the community when it comes to unity, right? Um, but I always like to say that there are strategies for resistance. I mean, the reason why we hold so much impact is because we were able to be resilient. We were able to stay on top, but we didn't do that, but by one person. It didn't start. It started with one person, but it wasn't one person doing it alone. Um, so that's something I kind of want to serve as a reminder. And I like to say that we could do it at a personal, communal, and institutional level. So personal being embracing our natural features, and obviously that's easier said than done, especially if you're in a environment that tells you what you look like is not okay. But that isn't okay. So at a communal level, when we attend these events, such as the Tubman talk talking about internalized anti-Black racism, and when we're at schools, we push for Afro-diasporic studies or workplaces to practice anti-discrimination policies that protect our natural hair or our accents. So before we leave, I want us to create a collective vision of the culture and community we've been discussing. So, whether or not you're a member of the diaspora who sees its influence, I want us to think about what's one word that comes to mind when we reflect on Blackness, Black culture, or the Black community. So, you all can kind of scan the QR code and you can kind of type in at least one word or multiple words to kind of create a word cloud, and we can take a look. Wow. Look at that. Wow. I love it. And I think it's beautiful. And I think I wanted to do this as a closing because I feel like it is such a heavy topic where we can kind of focus on the negative. But when I look at these words, this is who we are. I mean, this is the truth that we must internalize and defend against all external and internal hate. So, the reason why I wanted us to create this together is because there was a time where an act of profound courage was drinking from a whites only water fountain. And this act was a defiance rooted in the knowledge that we are worthy, even if the system denied it. We must continue to work and to do the work of our ancestors, reclaiming the dignity and worthiness that was stolen by colonialism. And we must continue that legacy of resistance by fighting the hate that lives inside of our communities. For everyone in this room, we must commit to speaking up against hate, whether it's coming externally from racist systems or internally from our own minds. You know, the internet, they tend to flood our media with what we interact with, and negative can overflood our positive media. Uh, but we have the power to change the narrative through deplatforming those who push hatred online and in person, and making no room for hating one another within the community and by those who consume its culture. We will be stronger and unite. And I know that we have spent this time examining how the world attempts to devalue Blackness, but we must close by acknowledging that it's indisputable power. Blackness is powerful, undeniable, and essential. The world truly cannot function without the innovation, style, and joy that flows throughout the diaspora. Um, we're told to hate ourselves, but we shouldn't believe that lie. Not when the culture, the style, the history, and the very essence we originate are globally desired and imitated. So, my challenge for you all, or our challenge, is to refuse the colonial inheritance and embrace this power. Go forth with dignity, pride, and humanity. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I think she deserves a louder round of applause. Thank you for that. Thank you. Hmm. Okay, so there's so much to unpack, but I think I am going to, since was originally meant to be like a workshop style, so let's just keep it in the spirit of the workshop. Do we have questions or comments from within the room and also online? We'll start from those within the room. One, two, three. Okay. I think I'll just take it one after the other. I'll take the first three and then allow you to respond. If you could please introduce yourself as well.
So sorry I came late and I had to fix up some issues at my faculty. Good afternoon. I had a peripheral information of what you were talking about Blackness. My question to you is, what do you know about the Black Panthers? And how do you relate that culture and belief to what you just said?
While you're thinking about that, I'll go to the next person.
Hi, my name's Ire. I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to comment about how I really liked how you used modern examples. I know black, I don't, or I know, yeah, I know black, I Dominican mean. Even though we just talked about not laughing about it, I have laughed about it, and like seeing you use that, and then even talk about the Toronto man's accent, and then even the YN, like those are such things that like unconsciously will be like, oh, he's a YN, oh, I hate the Toronto man's accent, oh, blah, blah, blah. And seeing how like you relate that to now, I feel like people don't talk about that a lot. So just props to you. I really like that.
First of all, great job, Karina. It was a really lovely presentation, and it's nice to see how deeply you've been thinking about these questions. One's a comment and one's a question. So, just the integration of the Toronto sound accent thing, you should definitely talk to Dr. Ola Mohammed because she's working on a project about Toronto accents. So, they would be really interesting to see how you collaborate together. Also, I wanted to see you maybe speak a little bit more about the idea of, internalized anti-Black racism vis-a-vis like cultural appropriation. I think you talked a little bit about it and you were showing some similar you were showing, I think you were sort of explaining a lateral way in which internalized racism happened, but I wanted to maybe hear a little bit more about the interplay of those two things, right? Thank you.
Okay, and maybe I'll add a fourth question. The meme that you showed us, I know Black, I Dominican, it really got to me, and I was wondering whether you could speak within the specific case study of Dominica, uh, or Hispaniola in general, really. Uh, what does it mean to be Black in that space, and why is Blackness such a thing that they had to humorously uh, jettison?
Wow, these are amazing questions, and it's all about the topic that I am really excited to talk about. So, firstly, to your question, thank you so much for your question. So what I do know about the Black Panther Party is kind of their role in community and having that safe space. When it comes to internalized anti-Black racism, um, I'm not too sure about it. I will be honest. However, um, I think when I talked about how we as the community can come together to kind of unite, I guess the Black Panther Party, with how they had spaces to converse, spaces to rally, spaces to protest, spaces to actively target issues in society. That's kind of how I personally relate in that sense. Just because, for example, I am a part of multiple Black student associations here at York University. So I use those spaces for Black students to kind of come together and speak on these issues. And that's why it sparked kind of my idea on having this Tubman talk, because this is something that is so well brought up immensely from the youth. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question. Yeah.
It does.
Okay.
When it's set, relates also the Black Panther.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to coming together and uniting, it's such a deep topic that we can get into, because I feel like what the community also needs is sort of that guidance and kind of that safe group. I mean, we can find so many safe group for mental health. We can find it for women in law. You can find it for Caribbeans and or Caribbean people. And I think what's amazing about that is we do have those spaces, but we don't have a certain kind of group as the Black Panther Party, where it is notable, where they are sitting at certain chairs with certain opportunities to kind of discuss certain platforms. So when we're talking about unity and how we can go about kind of like gathering as a community, I do think we need some sort of community that is going to be sitting at chairs to make these policies, to represent a body of people such as the Black community, and to discuss these topics that we're having, especially to show that we, both Black men and especially Black women, together are able to work together to unite and have these conversations without the debate of podcasts online. But yeah. And sorry, the second question was, I think I have that written down. So the topic about cultural appropriation and kind of how it intersects with the lateral internalized racism. So I remember in high school, I had this conversation about cultural appropriation. And when I had these conversations, I had one student come up to me privately, and they said, I know about cultural appropriation. I know it's wrong, but I have non-Black friends who do it. And I don't want to have that conversation with them. And I think when we're talking about students who know it's wrong, but or people who know it's wrong, but they probably don't want to have that conversation, it is kind of that need for acceptance in the community and kind of wanting to assimilate. And I think that also dives into the community, and why it's not always unified is because of fear. You know, it's scary to look vulnerable to talk about, the things that you don't want to accept, the things that you're not kind of able kind of touch. You don't have your boundaries with that. So I think with cultural appropriation, and
what is the meaning of that word?
appropriation. Yes. So I need to explain that actually now. So cultural appropriation is when your your culture is being used in a way that's commodified. So essentially, I have examples on the top of my head, and cultural appropriation to me means that your culture is being used in a way for tokenism. It's not used properly, and also it's used in a demonized way, I would say. Um, to give example, it's the abuse of wearing braids when you don't understand the ancestral connection to it, when you don't understand the history behind it, or when it's speaking in a certain dialect from a culture you didn't grow up around, you're not a part of, and you're using it for your own advantage. So I think the reason why this is such a big issue in the community, especially cultural appropriation and lateral internalized racism, is because we're seeing our brothers, our sisters, kind of allow that to happen, and it's like, how are we going to have unity if one person's saying, it's okay? No, it's not okay. So I think it kind of creates this barrier between wanting to accept that realistically we just want to be assimilated. We just want to be, in a society where we don't have to talk about all the time that we're tired or that we don't agree with certain things. So I think if that answers your question, I know I can go forever about cultural appropriation and how that intersects, but yeah, that's my answer. And yes,
Yeah.
I know you.
Yeah.
So I touched briefly on the I Know Black Eyed Dominican, and I think this is something that also I want to talk about that happens in Guyana and Trinidad as well. And I think this does. I think for the case in Guyana and Trinidad, which is I'm Guyanese, so I think I have a textbook answer for this, but particularly, okay, I think I'm going to answer your question about the DR first before I jump to Guyana and Trinidad. But with Dominican Republic, through the dictator Rafael, he had thousands of Haitian and Dominicans who are of African descent killed because it was an attempt to whiten the nation. So what we would have done is to encourage marrying those who are white of lighter complexion to essentially whiten the populations down. So as a result, uh, we have people, we have Dominicans who are particularly prefer to identify with just being Dominican rather than kind of saying the Afro part. And the way this joke came about, which is the I Know Black, I Dominican joke, I remember seeing it on TikTok, and I was confused why this was being joked about because it was used in a context where they their grandmother refused their granddaughter to date someone of darker complexion because they needed to keep the bloodline Dominican, despite the fact that the person was Dominican but just dark skinned. So it kind of reveals that reflection of the dictator Rafael, who essentially wanted to whiten the population and choosing to identify with rather Spaniard blood rather than the African descent. So I don't know if that quite answered your question, but yeah, it's basically an attempt to assimilate more with the Spaniard blood or the Spaniard bloodline rather than acknowledging your African ancestry.
I have a question.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Hi.
can.
Thank you. Great talk, by the way. Loved every single moment of it. So something I picked up from when you were talking, think at least some themes that almost stood out to me was the idea of reinforcing and upholding versus like resisting and disrupting. And so we sort of talk about the role our communities play, whether it's leveraging language or media, and how it can be reinforced. You can be used to reinforce colonialist rhetoric, or on the other hand, used to like reclaim and resistance. So for instance, in the 4C example you used of that TikToker, right? And so other than overt forms of dismantling like the dismantling the reinforcement of internalized and anti-Black rhetoric, like for instance, like calling people out, like in those relationships we have around us. Are there some, maybe I would say, preventative ways that we can approach reclaiming and resisting rhetoric that disrupts internalized anti-Black racism? Internalized anti-Black racism, in your opinion? Would love to hear any suggestions, because I really think, especially when the way like a lot of like young people leverage and like spend a lot of time in social media, it's influencing our language, it's influencing how we interact. It has real life impacts because we're not just we're constantly operating in a context, and I think a lot of people forget that. And so I think it'll be helpful to like, how do we even prevent a lot of like internalized anti-Black racism from festering on in our little pockets that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, and it's something I ask myself every day. But honestly, I would love to say it starts at the systems, whether that's school, whether that's the government. But you know, there's the social aspect of it. There's social media. There's you know, it's easy to scroll. You can't really hide from that. And I think what that is we need to hold people and we need to hold things more accountable. So I believe when we're talking about it, it can be taken from an angle of, you know, digital platforms teaching the government. But I think if I'm thinking about it from a youth perspective, you know, when you're young and you have your phone and you can easily scroll on it, I think it always takes it starts in the homes. I think that we need to have parents who are committed to raising their Black children in a way where we celebrate Blackness and not that it's a burden. And we need to teach our histories, whether that's at homes and classrooms. Um, we need to encourage our young Black boys, our young Black girls, that they are capable to adventure off into any single field that they put their minds to, that they are capable to put any sort of energy into anything that they put their minds to. I mean, I think we need support in all aspects. Like all aspects, I think we do need support from the very beginning. And that's not to say that we're babying the community, but more so we're giving something to the community that has been robbed for so long, that we are always short at advantage. But I want to make sure that we that short of advantage doesn't touch us, not even by the slightest. So yeah, I feel like it's just giving it more attention and acknowledging it and calling it out.
And we don't have to talk about it to to you. So okay, hold on, losing my line of thought. Okay. The first, I think I'll just talk about the comment first. So when you were talking about cultural appropriation and you displayed an image of how something could be pejorative if performed by a Black person and celebrated if a white person does the same thing. I mean, like the hairdo and other stuff. It just got me thinking about something that we see every day. So I'm speaking from the Nigerian context because I am Nigerian, and so it's so easy to watch everyday Nigerians speaking English in a particular way, and we make fun of ourselves, like, oh, Look at how you're speaking English with your, it doesn't matter where you're from, with your Enugu accent or with your Ibadan accent, like you're speaking like an Ibadan man, like basically like some accents that are like super difficult to understand. And we make fun, and then people react violently by saying, well, English language is not a test or evidence of intelligence, and those kind of responses. But then when you find a white person in the same space speaking with the same accent, everyone starts to laugh and celebrate, sort of like, oh, and then we even trying to grade the white person based on how accurate they sound. Oh, he got the accent so well. Oh, and then it's like clapping for the person, something that you will criticize your fellow citizens for, you're celebrating. And it just got me thinking about how appropriation functions in that kind of space where we are mad at fellow Black people for doing the same thing, and then we celebrate white people for doing the same thing. So it's just, again, so that's the comment. So the two questions are in two different directions, so you don't have to respond again. I just a food for thought. Yes, that's true. That's true. Absolutely. I mean, when the white person does it so well, then we start calling them Nigerian names. It's like you're almost celebrating the same thing that you're critiquing someone else for. It's really sad. Now that I think about it, I have never thought about it in the sad, like reflective cultural appropriation way before now. I knew it was bad, but not in the sense in which I am now thinking about it. So the first question would be about the future of the Black community. I mean, what would it look like if we were to think about unity or safe space? And I am thinking as a historian here, so I'll give two examples, two popular examples: Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. Both were, or if we were to complicate it further, Marcus Garvey. I mean, these are like three different models of what Black future looks like during the early 20th century. Malcolm X is often seen as the guy who would preach for a radical separation. I mean, similar to Marcus Garvey, like Black business, Black freedom, Black this. And then Martin Luther King would be much more moderate. Like, yeah, we just have to show that it's not based on the color of your skin, but on the strength of your character, the usual stuff that we're all familiar with. So I just want us to think a little bit more about that. What would the future look like based on all the models that we've found in the past, or even another model, the Black Panther Party that was mentioned, which was also quite strict and regarded by some as an extremist group. So that's one question. The second question, which again I said completely different, I was thinking about hierarchies and proximity to whiteness based on what you said. And I was thinking about how these things play out in different parts of the world. I'm sure it also plays out in terms of colorism. It's defined as colorism, but South Africa is a critical exception here, in which you find white, colored, Black, and Trevor Noah. Everyone knows Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah is seen as Black today in the United States, but he's regarded as colored in South African. He's not Black in the South African place. He's not Black, and being a colored person has its privileges in South Africa. It has its pains as well, because you're more like an in between. You're neither here nor there, neither fully Black or fully white, because you have a parent. So that's something that I'm also thinking about. So how can we sort of navigate hierarchies? How do we explain it when hierarchies shift based on region, based on which part of the world in which you are? I mean, because for some, in some spaces, I don't want to cite examples, but the truth is that in some spaces, Nigeria is a curious place. I mean, so people that would be considered Black in North America can sometimes be considered white in the Nigerian space with privileges of whiteness. And I don't need to cite examples. I think it's a case of if you know, you know. And so that's something that I'm also thinking about. You don't have to respond, but again, I'm trying it open. And yeah, that's it. Do we take one more question? And then because of time.
Hello. Apologize if I'm not concise with my question here, but you were talking earlier about how we combat anti-blackness and internalized anti-blackness, and from my perspective, like moving through the world, blackness is something that is politicized, and it's something that looks as that's only accepted if it looks a certain way, and which is if it conforms to sort of whiteness in a certain sense. So I was wondering, because you said by changing how we sort of think about blackness, so maybe like teaching our histories and being more proud about our heritage, that would sort of help us combat anti-blackness and internalized anti-blackness. So my question is, if we live in a society that that rewards anti-blackness and punishes people for being black and being individual and unapologetically black, is it enough for us to change our conversations and our attitudes internally as black people about our blackness? Is that enough to combat sort of the anti-blackness issue when there is a bigger societal problem at hand? Is my question.
Amazing questions as well. I'm really loving the questions from everybody. It's really, really insightful. And I really love that we have this space to even speak on the things that we are doing today. So is it enough? No, it's not enough. I feel like it's actually the first mini stepping stone to actually addressing the bigger issues in today. I mean, when we're talking about the conversations of what's going on in Congo and Sudan, there are things that we have to address as well on top of that. But I do think that in order to address even those issues, we have to address what's within ourselves and how much we accept, because some people might have the mindset that, oh, that's what's happening in Africa, that has nothing to do with me here. But realistically speaking, we need to learn how to be concerned about our brothers and sisters across as the African diaspora, period. So no, I don't believe it's enough. I think we are still in a structure of the government where, you know, not all things will be in our favor, and we're not sitting at chairs where decisions actually affect us. But until then, I think the first stepping stone is acknowledging that this is a problem in our society, and I think what's up to that is creating kind of those platforms for Black students like myself, even younger. I mean, I'm a supply teacher. I teach young Black kids about being proud in their heritage, teaching them things that I never saw in my elementary school. So, you know, these are the stepping stones, and you just, if you have any sort of compassion, you know, showcase that, share that with the world, that this is what the world needs more, and we do need more compassion. We do need more of it. So yeah, that's my answer to that question. It is a difficult one because, you know, I do want to say yes, it is enough, and we can unite and we can hold hands, and you know, but unfortunately there's a lot of division, and I think it starts with understanding the division, but also the intersectionality between them.
Yeah, I have to say something in the comment. Nigerian, yeah. I might say something here.
I've been in Canada for 3 years, a permanent resident, and I blame Africans for one thing: altitude. Nigerians, for instance, in their greater proportion and percentage, have very wrong attitudes generally when it comes to sociological issues. Fine, I'm called to the Nigerian bar. I was a civil servant, worked with the Ministry of Justice of my state. had interactions in the customary court of law in my state, and there were few individuals, just one individual in my experience on the bench in Africa who had the right attitude, amongst others. This is a country with education. This is a country with resources. This is a country we're blessed. The only natural resources Canada has above Nigeria is what you call bitumen. But go and check the state of economic development in Nigeria. So people might blame sectionalism. People might blame discrimination. People might blame dichotomy in societal identification. But I will not blame them to an extent. I will not blame them to an extent because we blacks, or some blacks, or few blacks, or greater proportion of blacks, especially in Africa or in Nigeria, for instance, honestly speaking, they lack the good attitude towards life. And fine, I've been in Canada, I wouldn't condemn all white people. I've had good experience with some white people who were excellent in attitude, while I've had some other ones who had disgusting attitudes. So in essence, we blacks have to know our identity. The spirit might be different, but let's stick to what the truth is. Let's speak to what is honest. Let's speak to the cardinals of what the Bible says. Do to me what you want others to do to you, and do to others what you want others to do to you. So sectionalism is born out of a displeased societal value system. I'm not praising Canada absolutely, but in proportion of my appreciation, I think I'm okay being here. Yeah. So sectionalism in dichotomy of nationalism will exist. We keep existing until we have a change of heart. Yeah.
Do you want to respond?
Okay. So, yes, I want to thank you both for your comments. I do want to speak a little bit to your comment about the future and how that might look like. So, when we're talking about the future of our society and how that will look like when we're navigating internalized anti-Black racism, I always take a look at the history. And people might wonder, why, if you're looking at the future, why are you looking at history? And I mean, I'm talking about how the historical and theoretical frameworks of internalized anti-Black racism translates to contemporary social media. So yes, I will look at history. So when we're looking at Black Wall Street, when we're looking at how we built societies, our societies, our kingdoms that we've had, I think I would look at there and how we can translate that. When I'm speaking about Canada, I would say in a Canadian sense, but basically I would try to replicate what our ancestors did, and I'm not talking about the colonial period. I'm talking before colonial period and the successes that we have in our history. And I think that's what we also need to look at more rather than the oppression when we're talking about how we are navigating the future. So that's a little bit of like how I would answer that. But yeah.
There's so much to say, and it is it's an interesting conversation, and it's also a difficult one. And I'm glad that we've been able to have this kind of conversation led by Karina, once again, a third year undergraduate student here at York University. It shows the level of engagement that we have here, yeah, if I can say so. And it also shows that if we're having this kind of conversation at this stage of our career, I'm wondering what the kind of conversations we're going to be having in 10 years or in 20 years. It's really impressive. And I think she deserves all the round of applauses that we can muster here in plural. In the Thank you so much for your fascinating talk on what you call the post-colonial mindset or we can even call it a colonial mindset if we stretch the definition of colonialism across all time periods, particularly it's in the mind. And I'm actually looking forward to, again, to more conversations with you outside of this space. And thank you, everyone, for staying on to the end. Thank you to those who are still on Zoom as well. And that's it for today. Do we have a Tubman Talk next week? Yes. So next week, same time, 2:30 in the afternoon on Thursday. We'll see you here again and online for our next Tubman Talk. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.